Hello, hello. Welcome to Reading Time. My name's Time, and today we're going to be reading Little House on the Prairie. Let's get to reading. Little House on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder is the third book of the Little House series, which goes over the life events of Laura Ingalls Wilder. This series is partially autobiographical and partially historical fiction. What that means is that it is based on the life events of Laura Ingalls Wilder, but these events are sometimes changed a little bit or details are altered to help with the storyline, and so that's why it's classified under historical fiction even though it is partially autobiographical. This book in particular details the events of the Ingalls family traveling from their home in Wisconsin across the American prairie to homestead a farm. This journey ends up being about 640 miles, and so the book goes over their traveling to the region, then building up the farm, and also their interactions with their fellow settlers and the native people in the region. This book is considered an American classic by quite a few people. It gives great examples of human fortitude and the ability to overcome significant challenges and looks at the daily life of the pioneer homesteaders. However, there is also a lot of content in the book that I personally had issues with that made it uncomfortable for me to read it. And as such, I'm personally going to be rating it at a 2.5 to maybe 3-star level at the most. A lot of the issues I have with the book has to deal with the content itself, so I'm just going to dive into the content section now. One thing to be aware of with this book is violence. While there are no significant examples of violence in the book, there is a lot of threats of violence, especially toward Native or Indigenous groups presented in the book. The next thing to be aware of is substance usage. There's obviously alcohol usage and there's also tobacco smoking, mostly done by the adult men in the series. Now, the rest of the content is really what I had more issues with. And something to keep in mind with this book is that it was written in the 1930s about the late 1800s. And so a lot of the ideas and some of the behaviors that are seen in this book are reflective of actual behaviors and ideas of the time period. So one thing that I had issue with was the discipline and the thought process behind what children should and should not do. As I said, it was very reflective of the time period. So there's instances of Laura and her older sister being chewed out for even thinking about doing something that they shouldn't. Or there's also the mindset of children should be seen and not heard, especially at the dinner table, or that they should not speak until spoken to. So I had some issues with that, and obviously that's not a mindset that we see as often today. But the topic that I had more issue with, the content that you see more so in the book, is the racism present, especially toward Native or Indigenous groups. So as I said previously, some of these mindsets were very present during this time period. And as the American pioneers were moving into Native territory, there was a lot of tension between groups, and that is definitely seen in the book. Many of the Native characters presented in this book are depicted as savage or wild, as having no culture, and obviously that is not true. But this was how a lot of people during that time period, especially these American settlers, would have seen these groups. When it comes to talking about racism or sexism or any other sorts of social issues like these, In books, especially books that were written in earlier time periods, I think it's common for the issue of censorship to be brought up. And everyone has different ideas about what should be censored or whether censorship should or should not be a thing. And I'm just going to give my 2 cents on the issue. Obviously, you might have a different mindset on this, but for me personally, I think that it's okay to censor material for your own reading or your own enjoyment. If you don't want to read something that has certain content in it, then don't read it, or maybe find summaries ahead of time so you know what you're going into. But I don't think that material should generally be censored, because I think that by censoring, for example, blatant examples of racism and other ideas that may be reflective of the period, that you are taking away perspectives that actually did exist. And by so doing, it feels like you're trying to erase what has happened in the past. Now, we can't fix issues that have already happened in the past, right? What has happened has happened. But we can learn from those experiences, and we can have open discussions about why these behaviors or why these depictions are not accurate or are not okay. And if we just erase it or pretend like it didn't happen, then we're taking away from those groups that may have been marginalized. Now, as I said, that's my own perspective. I know that other people have different ideas, and I would love to talk about censorship or what you think should be done when approaching content that has more sensitive social issues related to it. Now, outside of content, I did actually have some other issues with the book as well, and this is probably just more of a personal taste issue. This book is written, as I said, by Laura Ingalls Wilder and details events from her life that are slightly changed to make the book more interesting toward the intended audience, the intended age group, which I would say would be 3rd to 7th grade. I think that mid-elementary school to middle school age range is a good period of time for those who are maybe interested in American history and learning more about the events of that time period. Obviously, this would need to be done delicately, and I would say that if you do intend to read this book with a younger reader or teach it to younger readers, that you also include a text set with other examples and perspectives of that time period. Because this is a story based off of the author's own life events, you do get that sense of an oral retelling through the voice and narration of the story. And what I mean by that is that it does feel like someone older is telling you about the events of their life. And I do think that is an interesting way to write a story, and definitely fits with the story actually being based on her events. However, I personally didn't enjoy it. It just didn't fit well for me, and that, like I said, is probably just a personal taste thing. I didn't enjoy it this time around. Maybe if I read it a different time, I would find it more enjoyable, but this time I really didn't like it very much. So, as I said, this personally wasn't a book that I enjoyed. I think that you can learn a lot from the book, and it does go over details of what pioneer living would be like. So, in that regard, it's really interesting, and I did enjoy that historical fiction side of it. However, the content itself made it difficult for me to tolerate the story as a whole. So this wasn't a book for me, but maybe this is a book series that you would enjoy, especially if you're someone who is more interested in that American pioneer time period of the late 1800s. Even though I didn't enjoy the book very much, I did scratch off the poster square. It's right by A Wrinkle in Time. We have This square, a little farmer who's smiling at us. So we'll see what the next book brings. Let me know what you think of Little House on the Prairie if you have read it, or if you have read any of the rest of the series. I'd be interested to see what your thoughts are on maybe other books in the series or the series as a whole if you've read the whole thing. And if you're interested in following along with this reading challenge, please feel free to subscribe to the page. We've passed our 10 subscriber mark, and I would love to see more of you join up if you are interested. Feel free to also follow me on either Facebook or Instagram to see weekly updates on the book of the week. And as always, I hope that you have a marvelous week and a wonderful read.